imagination and making him feel ridiculous. Her body would be sent by ferry to Aberdeen for the post-mortem, and Perez hoped they could get a name from dental records once the pathologist James Grieve had started his work, but that could take days. And they needed some idea who she was before they could find her dentist. Perez didn't think there was any point checking in the islands. She wasn't local. He would have seen her in town or heard about the dark lady who lived on the edge of his community. Now he was between meetings. He'd made coffee and stared out of his window towards the town hall. Its bulk was a shadow against the grey sky. Sandy Wilson knocked and came in. "I've spoken to most of the estate agents in Lerwick. None of them managed the Ravenswick house or rented it out." "We need to track down the owner then," Perez continued, looking out of the window at the rain. "The dead woman might have been their friend or relative. Do we still have no idea who it belongs to?" Sandy shook his head. "The person who might have had an idea is dead." "What do you mean?" "Magnus Tait. He would have grown up with Minnie Lawrenson, the old lady who used to live there. He might have been able to point us in the direction of the niece who inherited it." But Magnus had died after a stroke at the age of 85, and Perez suddenly realised that he still needed to grieve for the man. Magnus had been a part of his life for the past few years. The landslide cutting short the funeral had disturbed the natural process of mourning. At least Magnus had been laid to rest with some dignity, lowered into the ground before the cemetery had been inundated with mud. Perez had first met Fran, his fiancée, because she'd been Magnus's neighbour, and the crofter had arrived at Perez's door soon after Fran's funeral, looking as awkward as a shy child, clutching in his hand a bag of sweets he knew Cassie loved. "For the bairn. Yon wife was a good woman." Then he'd turned and walked down the bank to his croft, making no other demands, not expecting Perez to chat or to invite him in. The woman in the red dress couldn't have been the owner. After all, why not? Perez thought. He'd imagined the dead woman as exotic and Spanish, but perhaps an American woman would wear red silk too. Sandy shrugged. He didn't like to speculate in case he got things wrong. "And you're sure that nobody has been reported missing?" Perez thought the woman couldn't have been staying in the house alone, or if she was there alone, she had known people in the islands. February wasn't a time for a walking holiday or sightseeing, and if she was that sort of tourist, she wouldn't be dressed in the way they found her. She'd be wearing jeans and a sweater, woolen socks, even indoors. "When will they go in?" "Soon," Sandy said. "Before it gets dark. They've got a generator set up, but they'd rather start during daylight." Perez nodded. "You be there, Sandy. But before you go, talk to Radio Shetland about putting out a request for information on this evening's show. A phone number for the owner or a contact. She'd have somebody to clean the place between visitors and to hold the keys, and a description of our mysterious woman." "We weren't in time to get the dead woman onto yesterday evening's ferry," Sandy said, as if he'd just remembered and this was something Perez should know. "She'll be going south to Aberdeen tonight. James Grieve is ready for her." "It would be good to have a name before James starts the post-mortem," Perez said. "I'd like to tell the relatives what's happening before he begins his work." His phone rang. He was expecting a summons to another meeting, but it was Catherine Rogerson, the young woman who'd recently taken over as the teacher at Ravenswick School. "I'm afraid we're closing the school today, Mr. Perez. The engineers department wants to survey the hill all the way up along to Gillsgarth. It might need shoring up from the road. If there was another landslide there, the school would be right in its path, and we've been advised we have to get all the children away." She still sounded like a child herself, rather earnest and desperate to do the right thing. Perez knew her father, who was a lawyer with an office just off Commercial Street. "I know Maggie Thompson sometimes cares for Cassie when you're at work, but she's away at her sister's and her flight's been cancelled." So now he'd have to start ringing round to sort out childcare, the last thing he needed. Duncan Hunter, Cassie's natural father, was in Spain, apparently making out a deal with a company supply.